Welcome to the new season of the Live Your Spa Life show. The Spa and Spa Life stands for Seek Power Always, that divine power within you to do what you're here to do. The theme for this season is intentional living. Amazing people like you share ways to live by design and with purpose to ensure that this short ride of life occurs with choice, physically, financially, spiritually, and in your relationships to create a world-class life. In these times of uncertainty, it's time for you to move past the distractions and start trusting yourself more through your God-giving knowingness. No one truly knows better what's best for you than you. In this season, you'll have plenty of examples of people choosing their best life and creating a positive impact through intentional living. Thank you for sharing your precious time with us and being part of the Live Your Spa Life conversation. With us today is Michelle Dickinson, a resilience coach and workplace mental health strategist. She is also a TEDx speaker, a published author, and a memoir entitled Breaking Into My Life. Michelle goes first and sees herself as the bridge that helps people get comfortable with their mental health so that they reach out and get the support that they need before they hit a crisis. She makes it look okay to be not okay, and thrives on making a real difference in the lives of others, especially around their well-being. Michelle, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much for having me.
Well, I'd love to jump into this because this has really come up in the last couple years with the pandemic and people being more isolated than ever. What do you see the differences or patterns are in mental health in the last couple years?
Well, we definitely have recognized the importance of our well-being throughout the pandemic. I think people who had never experienced a mental health imbalance for the first time found themselves quarantined, found themselves in the midst of a lot of loss, whether it was loss of routine, loss of job, loss of financial security, or even the loss of loved ones. So it's had an impact on us. And so a lot of folks are learning how to navigate life, the new world, and navigate it with either depression or anxiety. The data is in, and 1 in 3 are either dealing with depression or anxiety. So it's very prevalent, and I think that because of the pandemic, it's given sort of society a permission to talk more about it, which I think is great. But we do have a lot more further to go in order to really normalize the narrative.
Yes. Well, and, as far as like organizations looking at how this changing dynamic, if you will, of, mental, whether it's fragility or people feeling more fear or just, moving through challenging things, how are companies, looking at this and how can they address some of this burnout?
Yeah, it's very interesting. We thought that, with the ability to work from wherever we wanted, that we would have the flexibility and the balance. And that, in fact, has made it even more difficult for people to have boundaries and to maintain a work-life balance. So the employers that I have been working with are very aware that they need to give their employees a little bit more support around their well-being. There's no question that most were extremely effective working in a remote environment, but there was a lot of isolation. So the organizations I'm working with, where I'm teaching either resilience to employees, teaching people leaders how to support their people, whether they're working in a hybrid, remote, or they're back in the office. How do they do that safely? They're bringing in programs like mine, and then they're also providing one-on-one resilience coaching, which is what I do as well, to really just have people understand what they can do, what's in their complete control in terms of preserving their mental health. Because we want to keep people healthy. We want to keep them empowered. We want to keep them, fully engaged in their work. So it's through those various programs that the companies that I'm working with, they're recognizing the importance of doing more to keep their staff healthy.
Got it. And, for our listeners, so we're kind of using the same language, if you will, how would you describe what resilience coaching is and how does it differ from traditional coaching?
So resilience coaching is really all about helping people recognize what they actually have within them. So I don't show up and give them any type of advice. All I'm doing is really working with them to reveal to themselves what they know to do to feel better. So I'm not, there's all kinds of other coaching out there. I can't really speak to that, but what I can tell you is I'm all about helping people unlock their own answers and leverage routine and make those little micro changes to really help boost their energy and feel better day to day.
Got it. So if somebody is like recognizing that they're kind of on this slippery slope and things aren't maybe as easy as they used to be, or maybe it's harder to get through certain things or things like that happen, what are some of those micro changes that they can make?
So I'm asking them sort of what is their routine? The first question I have to everybody is, what is your routine? The majority of people I work with come to me and they're literally falling into their day. They literally hit the alarm clock, the last possible moment they can, they jump out of bed and then boom, they're into the routine. So like the first thing I would say to them is like, how are you starting your day? Are you in a calm, grounded state? Or are you rushing into your day and just sort of holding it all together and you're setting yourself up for compounded stress throughout the day? Or are you giving yourself your own time to feel grounded, feel centered, fill your own cup before you fill the cup of others? So that's typically where I start. Is I want to know, what are they doing to fill their cup daily? And I'm not talking the vacation every 6 months, the massage on my birthday. I'm talking, what are you doing every day for yourself? Because majority of people do nothing.
Got it. Got it. So if we're not looking at some of those vacations or bigger things to completely unplug, what are some of those daily habits that people can do that you see the most impact that supports them in being grounded and starting a day, in essence, on the right foot?
Having a morning routine that works for you. So, and that depends what that is. I mean, some people like prayer, other people like meditation. Some people really, really get the most out of their morning if they get in a good workout. So it's really about, what do you know to do that is going to feel good for you? What works for one doesn't work for the other, but the reality is you have to be doing something to nourish yourself. So it's very customized based on, what they know to do for themselves.
Got it. I'm thinking of like some of our listeners who are working mothers that have like 2 to 4 children, and usually their waking moment is somebody else's needs in them, and they're hitting the ground for school or work and just all of these things. How does people kind of like slow their roll, if they will, and reclaim some of that time when literally their first waking eye is usually other people's eyes in their face?
No, I can so appreciate that. I think it's just a matter of finding what works. I mean, I think a lot of times people will say to me, well, I have all of these pressures on me. Everyone's counting on me to do something. But at the end of the day, if we don't claim time for ourselves, you're not going to be able to support anybody around you. So you have to find the time. And I'm not saying like you need hours. In most cases, like my own personal morning routine is 15 minutes. Like it doesn't have to be long, but you just have to find the time and claim the time for yourself and understand that by what is the impact by not taking that time for yourself. It might not be first thing you wake up. It might be a little bit later in the morning. It might be at lunchtime, whatever it is, but you have to make sure that that's a non-negotiable, because, it's the oxygen mask. You got to put the oxygen mask on yourself before you help others.
Yes, absolutely. I think it's, interesting for when people are in the mix of it, they don't always necessarily recognize it till they kind of hit that crisis mode. And, there's very, simple things. I know with a lot of my clients, I talk a lot about just things like taking a deep breath. Like some people hear that like, oh, just take a breath. But when you look at how those deep breaths, how it goes the oxygen to your brain, how that just in itself is very calming. And so sometimes it is very simple things that can make a difference, but we need to have those things at the top of our mind when we're in the mix of it, when we're maybe not thinking of it.
Yeah, I like to say make time to take the pause, because it's in the little pause. It doesn't have to be long. I mean, I even I share oftentimes a 5-minute meditation with Deepak Chopra. It's totally free. It's on YouTube. People can go and do that. But it's literally like 5 minutes. It's not that long, but it's taking the pause, catching your breath, clearing your head, that can give you a little bit more for that long game that you're playing.
Right, absolutely. Well, and a lot of times we look at, a lot of people who are listening, they look like, oh, well, that's good for you because things are working for you now. But we've all had, aspects in our past, right, that
Hmm.
have, affected us, triggered us. And, you've talked a little bit about like, past relationship and past depression and things that have, slowed you down or, affected you in a deep way. Can you speak to that? And not only like where your mindset at that time was, but what were some of those first steps that allowed you to move through those things?
Yeah, that's a great question because like I think anyone who's coaching anyone should have lived through something, right? It sort of seems interesting to me when there's people that are actually coaching people and they haven't navigated some of the hard stuff. So I grew up with a mother who had bipolar disorder, and mental illness and mental health challenges were always something that was like over there. It wasn't like something that was for me to deal with. I just would observe it. A few years ago, I was going through a divorce and found myself dealing with depression, like couldn't get out of bed, was not motivated, found myself very sad more of the time than not. And I was really struggling. So I knew better to get myself into clinical care. And I did. And I found myself a really amazing therapist who I still see to this day. I have no shame in that, nor should anyone else. But one of the things that I learned during my depression was that there were things that I could do to help myself. Things that I do to this day to preserve my mental health so that I don't find myself in those dark places. And one of them was exercise. I have always been someone who wanted to work out to a degree, but when my personal life was not going well, my professional life was not going well, I had a cousin who challenged me to train for a triathlon. And so I had no business doing a triathlon. I couldn't even run in high school, but like he challenged me. So, okay, fine, let me take this on. So I take on the triathlon, and in the training process, you become very aware of your diet because you want to make sure that you're performing the best that you can, you're beating your times, you're advancing. And so I became very connected to my health and to my fitness. And every time I was exercising, I was getting that endorphin high. So it was really helping me. And then I was starting to feel better and I was starting to look better. And one of the things that I realized was I had gained a little bit of momentum in the area of my health that was helpful in falling into the other areas of my life that weren't working well. So my advice is like find that one area of your life that is working and run it in the ground because it's going to give you the most momentum. And then you'll realize that can sort of flood into the other areas that aren't going well and keep you moving forward. So for me, if I don't exercise, I start to feel a little off. So exercise to me is definitely something that I'm doing every day to preserve my health.
Yeah, this is so great, because a lot of times we want to look at one thing and one thing can jumpstart us, but everything's interrelated. Like we are
Yes.
systemic people, like we, need to be around other people. We're looking at, mind, body, spirit, right? There's so many different aspects that build who we are. And when we can do one of the things and then see how it affects the others and how that really plays a part in it is such a big deal. I love what you're talking about like exercise because I think exercise. They say that the heaviest weight that you'll have is the one that like opens the door to a gym or allows you to open the door to go out for a walk or do that first step. But once you do it, no one regrets exercising after the fact, right? Because it does make you feel so much better. So just remembering how our body responds to things, how things are and feel for us. This year I've been increasing doing like cold plunging. And, that's like, talk about a shock to your system, but it's amazing how it affects like inflammation in the body and how more alert that you feel. So I love this inner relationship that you're talking about of the things that we look at. So that I think is super, super important. I think one of the things also that's kind of affected, particularly the last couple of years, is people's level of fear. Talk a little bit about your relationship to fear and how you move through it.
Yeah, I think, in general, fear is, you know, we have to remember fear is rooted from uncertainty, right? I think when you think about fear, it's just the uncertainty. And we lived through a lot of uncertainty where things were like all over the road. You could do something one day, you couldn't do it another day. The media plays into our fear. And I always tell people that when you start to feel fearful, you have to really take a step back and understand what's fueling that fear. Are they internal thoughts? Are they external thoughts? Where is that coming from? Because you can really you could be the one that turns the faucet of that off. And I always say, You can't be fearful and grateful at the same time. So redirect your focus over to the areas of your life that are working well and the love and the abundance that is already in front of you. Because so often we are so fixated on what's wrong, broken, what needs our attention, that we literally step over everything that is good and we don't focus our attention. But we know that where we focus our energy and our attention, that's what's going to expand. So those are the little things that I recommend that people just check where the source is, and then focus on the good, focus on what is good.
Right, absolutely. And I love you talking about like just having that self-awareness. I think particularly over the last couple of years, there were people that were glued to the TV and media, basically talking like the sky's falling. And, of course, if that's all you're having in your environment, if that's what you're feeling, then it's hard to find a good feeling thought and to look into that. And there's so many great scientific, information and research that's come out that you cannot be fearful or angry and grateful at the same time. So I love that you share that, because that is literally how we can flip the switch in our brain, is go to that place of finding something to be grateful for in the moment. And even in the most trying of times, if we can find just one thing in that, right, that's that one step that you can kind of get over the hump and then have it build that momentum and keep going further from there.
For sure. Absolutely. What we focus on expands. So, and we all have the choice of where we put our focus.
Yes, absolutely. So, company cultures have shifted a lot because there are people who are working more from home. But then as people are, with each other and things are happening, what are some of the things that companies can do to create a more cohesive culture, to make people, help boost that resilience that they have? What are some of the things that companies are doing for that? Because company culture really makes a difference on whether or not someone actually wants to be there or not.
Absolutely. And I go back to my own personal experience and why I do this work. So I had a boss who was not very empathetic or compassionate when I disclosed that I was dealing with depression. And so in that moment, I realized that there are just a lot of people leaders who are leading from a place that is very strategic and not from a place that is really, I don't know, I guess, laced with emotional intelligence, compassion. I'm all about what can we do to elevate the level of compassion in the workplace so that people do feel cared for. When you have an employee that feels cared for genuinely, you're going to get the best out of them. It's just a no-brainer. So, for me, when it comes to culture, it starts with our leaders, because the leaders are the face of the organization. The leaders are the face of the company to the employee. So how they interact with their staff, really, they're officers of the company. So we want them to be equipped, but we can't expect them to just know, how do I support people in a post-pandemic world, because we've never been here before. So, one of the things is really teaching leaders to get present to what is their relationship to their own mental health. How can you expect them to lead other people who might be struggling, who they might see a behavior shift or a personality shift, but yet they're not even comfortable with their own mental health? So one of the ways you elevate compassion in the workplace is you really help leaders get connected to their own well-being, and you inspire them to lead by example. Right? If they go first, if they start to like openly talk about emotional well-being and talk about what they're doing to preserve their health, they make it okay for their staff to sort of say, oh, you know what, this works for me. And it becomes a normal conversation. So I think that there's work to be done to really help our people leaders just be truly effective, coming out of a pandemic, knowing that 1 in 3 of their staff have probably been dealing with some type of anxiety or depression.
Yeah, I get that. It's interesting because I think before there used to be a lot of check the boxes. Like I had a one-on-one meeting with my employee, they did their work, all of these different things are going on. But some interesting things that I have received from some of the surveys that companies that have hired me is that, some of them say like, I don't feel heard, or I don't feel seen. And then I'll talk to the people in the management and they're like, what are you talking about? Like, I talk to them all the time and I have this one-on-one, and there seems to be a little bit of a disconnect between what the people in the company are doing versus people actually feeling seen or heard. There's like a different level that people don't feel seen or heard about. Can you like address that?
I think what it comes down to is the essence of trust. I think people will say what they feel is appropriate to say and not be honest and authentic if they don't feel like there's trust between a leader and their staff. I mean, it's funny because when I was at Johnson and Johnson, I was responsible for the Credo survey. And one of the things we learned was very similar to what you said. The leadership thought one thing, the employee thought the other. And what we realized in that experience was we needed to do a better job of authenticity, of transparency, being a little bit more vulnerable. Ultimately comes down to trust. What is your relationship with your staff? Are you cultivating trust every day? And is the employee taking on their part to develop trust as well? You can't just expect your leader to be the only person who's working at that relationship. So it's mutual, I think, trust that is the gap when it comes to having difference in occurrences from those conversations, right? Like, because you're not going to be vulnerable. You're going to say exactly what you think you want to hear from me and move on. So it takes something to be vulnerable and feel like there's security in being that honest.
Right. So if one or both of the sides feel like that trust has been broken, I find it that sometimes that can be like the biggest, gap or valley for people to cross because, it's like, it's kind of a catch-22. It's like, I feel my trust has been violated, but so now I can't trust. And so when that ripples in a company, that can be felt. So if there is a real or perceived broken trust, what are some of the steps that both sides can do, whether it's management or employees, or even in the private entrepreneurial structure, that people can do to bridge that once that real or perceived threat of trust has been broken?
So I believe that all things can be resolved through communication. And, it's when we go off into our corners and we shut down that it becomes the biggest issue. So when trust has been violated, it is the only way it can be resolved is through communication, through ongoing dialogue, through honesty, through, consistent communication, not the monthly one-on-one. So I would say it would have to be a mutual effort to keep the dialogue open, the communication lines open until you get to that place where trust has been restored.
Got it. Well, and I think too is like I think sometimes the elephant in the room is that conversation where a lot of times we have very surface conversations like, how are you? Good, fine, nice.
Yeah. Oh yeah. Got
Right.
it. Yep. Mm-hmm.
And so, that's not necessarily getting to know who somebody is or where they're about and what that looks like. Do you find that some of those deeper conversations occur like throughout the day with a kind of a concerted effort? Or do you think some of those are more like company activities away from the job where people don't feel like they're in the minutia of their day? Like, what do you think some of those things are? Because I do know that I have worked with some, individual business leaders who really do want to have a good corporate and have tried several things. And sometimes that lack of communication it's like that telephone game. Like you tell somebody one thing and then it gets down to the third person and they heard a completely different thing. And then you've got leadership going, that's not even what I said. Right.
Yeah.
So a lot of misinformation.
Yeah. I think, it's interesting because I don't think it's one size fits all and that there's one right answer. I think that there's always an opportunity to be looking at company culture, right? Like what is the company culture? I've worked with companies to help build mental health ERGs based on my experience building the ERG when I was in my former company. And, one of the things is you can't expect people to just one day wake up and want to be completely vulnerable and open. Like you can't. You need an environment that is conducive for that is ready for that. So what are the leaders in the organization doing to cultivate that safe space? And I always say that it takes a senior leader to go first. A senior leader to be vulnerable, to say, hey, there was a time when I struggled with anxiety, or there was a time when I was dealing with depression. And it sets the tone. And I think it's, if we want to arrive at a culture that is more open and trusting and authentic, and where a staff feels safe to be vulnerable, we have to see our leaders, lead the way and lead by example and give us permission to do the same. So we don't feel like, we're stepping out of queue. But I think there's always an opportunity to look at the culture and say, what is it that we're doing right? And what is it that we need to do better?
Right, right. And I think like you mentioned about, having that communication and just continuing to ask the questions and ask them in different ways. I mean, sometimes, somebody needs to hear something multiple times that it
Yeah.
finally hits them in a different way, depending on, how they're showing up that day at work and what happened in their home. I mean, there's so many different factors of, when people feel safe to do that. So, I think there's a note of encouragement to be like, just, keep showing up and keep asking
Yeah.
those questions and keep maneuvering the challenging things.
Yeah, for sure. For sure. And, honestly, when we think about leaders, I always reflect on the really great leaders I've had in my life. And the great leaders I've had in my life were incredibly self-aware. And the worst leaders I've ever had in my life were just horrible in terms of their own self-awareness, So I think if we want to show up and be better leaders, we have to really be willing to do the work, look in the mirror and unpack what there is to unpack so that the world isn't causing, them to react in ways that they feel like they don't have control over. So it's that natural curiosity. Why am I the way I am?
Absolutely. Great advice. If we all would just be a little bit more curious and also look at, hey, what's happening on the other side of the street, and then say, hey, tell me more about that, right? There's so many different ways to open up the conversations to then have somebody share. And then that's really when you start building those relationships and have some of those things happen. So that's awesome. Good. So one of the other things I was thinking about was I love asking my guests about what they've created in their own space, because the different environments that we create, we live differently in our bedroom versus our kitchen or our office. So what is your favorite room in your home and why?
I think as of late, because it changes, as of late, it's going to be my living room because I just got a giant beanbag chair that I absolutely love. And it's just a comfortable space to be in, and I love it. I mean, it's just so comfy, and I feel like I can just nestle up and watch TV or read a book. It's awesome.
That is so great. Well, one of the things I just love about that question is that, sometimes we think that, we have to make these wholesale changes all over the place, but sometimes just having that one safe space in our own space, or one where we actually feel good in, like that can actually be one of those foundational habits that you talked about, right? Where you've just created these spaces where you just love being in that space, or there's something, a comfortable place to sit, or just some of those things that those can be the foundations of your day that actually make the difference.
Absolutely. Oh, absolutely.
So good. Well, I know you and I could talk forever here, and I know that our listeners are going to want to stay in contact with you. How can they best do that?
So if you're a company and you're interested in learning about the workshops I do for leaders or employees on resilience, you can contact me through LinkedIn. It's the best place. I'm literally there all the time. I call it my second home. If you're interested in getting some resilience tips for free, you can follow me on TikTok. I have a cute little a spot there called Resilience Coach Michelle. As an individual, if you're looking to connect with me for one-on-one resilience coaching, again, you can follow me, either on TikTok or on LinkedIn. Those are probably the best. And I always love hearing from people, especially if they catch me on a podcast. So.
Perfect. Sounds great. And as you know, our theme for this season is intentional living. So in what ways do you live an intentional life?
Yeah, it's interesting because for me to teach people how to have morning routines and be healthy, I have to do that myself. Otherwise, I feel like a complete fraud. So the way that I live an intentional life is I'm very disciplined with my morning routine. I do things that literally will boost my energy and have me feeling good so that I can give the best version of myself to my clients.
So great. Well, thank you so much, Michelle, for being here and sharing your wisdom with us here today.
You're so welcome.
And to our listeners out there, if this has sparked something for you, maybe something's off with you, maybe, you're out of sorts in some way, really, we encourage you to reach out. If you've got questions, feel free to tag either Michelle or myself. We're happy to support you, give you some resources, and, share this, get this out there, because we really need to get into that conversation of what's working, what's not working, building that trust and that resilience that we have so that we can show up as our best self. So until we connect again, live your spa life. Bye for now. Bye-bye.